Hello, welcome to A Gray Barn Rising. Very happy you could join us this evening. Having a cup of oolong tea, and of course I'm sitting here with Bootsy Beagle. She might not be able to see her because of the blanket. I'm reading the poems this evening of the great Finnish poet who actually wrote in Swedish, Edith Södergran. And I want to read from one of her first books that was published in English. Although there is an expanded version of this book, Love and Solitude, that was released several years later. This book first appeared, I believe, in 1981. Yes, 1981. I want to read from this particular book because these were the first poems of Edith Södergran's that I came to. My dear friend John Bradley, also a poet, first discovered her and within a day or two told me about her. He discovered this book in a bookstore and I ran out and got it, and so this book has a lot of special memories for me. She was, as I mentioned, she was Finnish, but she wrote in Swedish, which was not a common occurrence at the time. She was born in 1892 and she left the body in 1923 from tuberculosis. Her father had also had tuberculosis, and it apparently ran in the family. She was diagnosed when she was 16 years of age. She lived a brief life and not an incredibly happy life. Her poems actually in her lifetime were scorned. She published, I believe it was 4, perhaps 3, but I believe it was 4 slim volumes of poetry during her lifetime. And they were ridiculed by critics because they left behind rhyme and meter. And one critic said, how can we call this poetry? Because she's left behind rhyme and meter. She was also a very independent, free-spirited young woman, and she really had ambivalence toward men. She believed in great freedom and joy in life, and especially for women. She had a wonderfully deep connection to nature. In fact, she would go out and take soap and water, and she would wash trees, the trees that grew out back of her house, for example, and she said to rid them of disease. In many ways, I think it's an incredible metaphor that even her desire for her own health and healing, that she would be looking at nature and trying to cleanse nature. It's almost this interesting symbiotic relationship that if you cleanse nature deeply enough, you cleanse yourself. I don't know exactly historically what her motivations were, but I've always found that an incredibly fascinating story and detail in her life. I'm fascinated by her work because it is very simple on the surface, but then there are these incredible moments and turns in her poems that are kind of mind-blowing, actually. And I thought I had this poem marked, and perhaps I don't. I'm looking for the poem. Here it is. I do have it marked, called We Women. I'd like to begin with this poem. This book is, by the way, translated by Stina Kachadorian, and it's bilingual Swedish and English edition. We women. We women, we are so close to the brown earth. We ask the cuckoo what he expects of spring. We embrace the rugged fir tree. We look in the sunset for signs and counsel. Once I loved a man. He believed in nothing. He came on a cold day with empty eyes. He left on a heavy day with lost memories on his brow. If my child does not live, it is his. It's one of those poems that has a very startling last line that almost seems to come out of nowhere. If my child does not live, it is his. That poem's entitled We Women. This is a poem of Södergran's entitled Two Goddesses. When you saw the face of happiness, you were disappointed. That's the other thing she does. She has these interesting paradoxes between two things that you really would not expect. You would think happiness and disappointment would not go together. But as we know, sometimes it does. Anyway, let me begin again. Two goddesses. When you saw the face of happiness, you were disappointed. This sleeper with languid features, she was the most worshipped and the most discussed, the least known of all goddesses. She who reigns over the calm seas, the flowering gardens, the endless days of sunshine. And you resolved never to serve her. Then closer again came grief, with depth in her eyes, the one never summoned, the best known and the least understood of all goddesses. She who reigns over the stormy seas and the sinking ships, over those imprisoned for life, and over the heavy curses resting on children in their mother's wombs. Another poem with a very startling closing to it. This is entitled The Moon. How all things dead are wonderful and unspeakable. A dead leaf and a dead body and the crescent moon. And every flower knows a secret, and the forest guards it. The circle of the moon around our earth is the path of death. And the moon spins its miraculous fabric that flowers love. And the moon weaves its wonderful web around all that lives. And the moon's scythe mows flowers down in late autumn nights. And all flowers await the moon's kiss in endless longing. One of the things I particularly admire in her work is this simplicity of perception of detail that then accretes and becomes something very mysterious, almost magical. She's almost penetrating some veil between the living and the dead, or this life and the other life. And I find it very powerful and very moving. And that's certainly the case even in the title of this final poem that I'm going to read in this episode this evening, called The Land That Is Not. The land that is not. I long for the land that is not, because all that exists I'm too weary to want. The moon tells me in silvery runes about the land that is not, the land where all our dreams are wondrously fulfilled, the land where all our chains fall, the land where we cool our bleeding brow in the dew of the moon. My life was a hot illusion. But one thing I have found, and one thing I have really won, the way to the land that is not. In the land that is not, my beloved walks with brilliant crown. Who is my beloved? The night is dark, and the stars quiver in response. Who is my beloved? What is his name? The heavens arch higher and higher, and an earthly child drowns in endless fogs and knows no answer. But an earthly child is nothing but certainty, and it stretches its arms higher than all the heavens. And an answer comes. I am the one you love and will always love. So that's a brief sampling this evening of the poems of Edith Södergran. Again, this is the most recent book, Love and Solitude. I was reading from an earlier, slimmer version of Love and Solitude, pardon me, of Love and Solitude, and selected poems 1916 through 1923. I very much hope that you'll seek her work out, It's a shame that her work was largely neglected and scorned during her lifetime, and perhaps we can give her a gift now and read the poems of Edith Södergran with deep attention, even all of these decades later.